So there's a bit going on tonight, including of what I'm sure is primary importance to the Australian diaspora in India and all over the world. The one-day International Cricket World Cup. Possibly the last one.
Seeing how things have adjusted.
51 for 1. Check that out a bit later.
Steve Smith, and this is
one wicket down already, obviously, but at least Steve Smith's made his way into double figures. Before any of that, though, the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, copping some pretty heavy flack, including in a Senate Estimates Committee hearing. An episode of the 7:30 report last week contained an interview by reporter Sarah Ferguson from the ABC. She hosts the show. She interviewed Bassem Naim. I think that's how you pronounce that. Bassem Naim, Hamas's international propaganda and PR guy. And obviously they tried to challenge some of his claims about things like targeting civilians and war crimes and all that, but ended up just copying it from all directions for basically platforming terrorist messages. So whether we want to call them terrorists or the armed forces of the Palestinian government, it's really up to you, but some of the more out there Arabic news websites, the kind that put the word Israel in quotes, call the IDF the IOF, Israeli Occupation Force, certainly refer to these Hamas militants as the Palestine's armed forces, so make of that what you will. But we'll start off with a trusty Guardian article here, mainly because they don't paywall their stuff. Interview with senior Hamas leader, editorially justified. ABC boss tells Senate grilling. David Anderson, who is the effective boss of the ABC, defends 7:30 interview, saying it was to challenge them, and confirms Middle East correspondent Tom Joyner under investigation. The ABC Managing Director, David Anderson, has defended the broadcaster's coverage of the Israel-Hamas war, including an interview with Bassem Naim, the Hamas head of international relations. Liberal Senators Holly Hughes and Sarah Henderson targeted the ABC over the 7:30 interview host Sarah Ferguson conducted with the senior Hamas leader on 17th of October. Ferguson pressed Naim on claims Hamas did not intend to target civilians in the deadly terrorist attack in southern Israel. Anderson defended the interview as editorially justified, as it gave an opportunity to test the claims being put forward by Hamas. Hamas being responsible for the attack on Israel, which put them at the center of the events that need to be understood by everybody, by interviewing one of their leaders, we were able to test some of the propaganda and outright lies being spread by Hamas, Anderson said through what I'm sure were several interruptions. And to be able to challenge them on the lies that they are spreading, which is exactly what happened in the interview. In this case, this is editorially justified to interview that representative given the heinous act that they did, to challenge them on the claims and the misinformation that they spread. Anderson said he would look at how the interview was represented on the ABC's rewatch platforms, but he disagreed with Henderson's claims that it was a disgraceful interview. She also claimed it undermined the ABC's credibility. As this conflict unfolds, Senator, we've interviewed that individual. Whether or not we interview that individual again, I can't say, but it is not something that we do lightly. But we do it when we feel there's an editorial reason to do it. Anderson said he would not remove the interview, but will ensure there is a description of the interview because it needs to be quite specific to the fact that this individual was representing a terrorist organization. There it is again. Terrorist organization. I'm not sure that matters in the context of an ABC editorial decision, whether it's a terrorist organization or a other particular nation's armed forces. They've been caught misrepresenting the facts on the ground, quite blatantly too. Henderson turned her attack on the interview into a criticism of the director of ABC News and Current Affairs, Justin Stevens, while citing her experience working with the ABC almost 3 decades ago. I will put it to you that your head of news and current affairs, Justin Stevens, is fundamentally failing in his job. I mean, this is an extremely controversial decision you've made. Yes, controversial, but not wrong necessarily. I believe, she continued, as a former host of the Victorian edition of the 7:30 report, I believe it's a reprehensible decision. This would never be made in my time. Back in my day. And the fact that these sorts of things are being published with your head of news and current affairs seemingly endorsing this is a disgrace. Anderson disagreed. I don't know if he does or he doesn't, and I will say on the record that Justin Stevens is an excellent director. He did confirm that the ABC's Middle East correspondent Tom Joyner was under investigation over a comment he made in a group chat with other foreign correspondents questioning claims of atrocities in the southern Israel terrorist attack. In a message that was leaked to other media outlets, Joyner referred to one of the reports as bullshit, which was questioned by other journalists in the chat. That's not what you want reporters from your national broadcasting corporation doing. That's not the sort of editorial decisions they should be making. Mind you, if this is a private WhatsApp group and he's not representing the ABC, everyone's got a private opinion. Anderson said Joyner regretted the comment and an investigation had begun, but reminded the committee the journalists deserved procedural fairness. I know that Mr. Joyner is quite remorseful and apologetic for the words that he used. He was, at the time, trying to do what journalists were doing. He was trying to verify what sources could back up what claims were being made at the time. Now, I wonder if he would have been as keen to verify the sources claiming 500 Palestinians died in an Israeli airstrike on a hospital. Anderson said staff were aware of the ABC's social media guidelines and rejected repeated claims from Hughes the broadcaster was anti-Semitic. So that's from The Guardian. To get a bit more context, we should probably check out the actual interview to get a better idea of the questions that were asked by Sarah Ferguson here, and whether these accusations against our ABC are fair, or whether, as the ABC director claims, there was legit public interest in platforming these more extreme elements. Again, I do have to wonder if stuff like this would have been caught up in the Albanese government's new misinformation control bill. Maybe if media companies and the government themselves weren't exempt from their own diktats, because I can all but guarantee you if a Palestinian activist said some of this on their Twitter or Facebook post or Instagram story, they would then be taken down on behalf of the government by the social media company. Same would go for an Israeli activist or a Jewish activist. So I really have to question the exemption for media companies and government in that misinformation bill, but that's a topic for another time. So let's check out this Sarah Ferguson interview.
First to the Middle East, where the situation for the people of Gaza worsens. US-led negotiations to open a humanitarian corridor continue. Allowing aid into Gaza and some refugees out is the hope. President Biden is expected in Israel tomorrow, his decision to travel there underscoring the complexity of the situation. Middle East correspondent Tom Joyner begins his report in the West Bank town of Ramallah.
Tom Joyner, who is now under investigation.
morning prayers in the heart of the Israeli-occupied West Bank. The Imam reflects on events of the past week.
يعني أنا ما أعتقد في الشعب الفلسطيني ما تغير عليه شيء جديد. يعني اللي حاصل من أحداث ومن مجازر وما تقوم به قوات الاحتلال الغاشم المجرم في قطاع غزة الحبيب وفي الضفة الغربية هو متعاقب منذ 60 عاما.
Since Israel declared war on Hamas, fear among Palestinians in the West Bank has grown.
This is pretty close to propaganda. So I'm going to try and skip forward the actual interview. Here we go. Good luck, Tom Joyner.
About 200 Israeli hostages remain in Gaza after they were abducted by Hamas militants. Many of them are civilians, including women and children. Hamas leadership, meanwhile, has told civilians in northern Gaza not to leave, despite warnings from Israel. Dr. Bassem Naim is Hamas's head of international relations and a former health minister. Dr. Bassem Naim, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you very much.
How did it help your cause to send thousands of your fighters over the border into Israel to murder, terrorize and kidnap Israeli civilians?
That's a pretty bold question. Can't really accuse Sarah of sopping to the Hamas cause here, if that's what she's leading with.
I think the story didn't start on October 7th. We have to remember that Gaza, in particular, is under suffocating siege now for more than 17 years.
And this is the line that's been run, again, by people like Hassan Piker in his interview with Piers Morgan. Whenever you question what gains could have come from the Hamas operation in southern Israel, it immediately pivots back to, yes, but they've been under brutal occupation. It doesn't really deal with the question at hand. It just sort of harkens back to the conditions on the ground there over the last decade or two. I'm not sure that really justifies in people's minds the actual Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, as they have called it. Let's see where he goes with this.
The whole generation is under a daily killing by poverty and sickness, which has converted the whole Gaza Strip into the biggest open-air prison, and Israelis have...
He's hitting all the key words: open-air prison, occupation, poverty, sickness.
...dealt with us as an animal farm. I have to remember you that the chief commander of Al-Qassam Brigade, who announced the operation, he was gave clear instructions not to target civilians or...
Given clear instructions not to target civilians. Us orders, October 7. I believe there were orders found that explicitly instructed them to target civilians. Maps and documents recovered from the bodies of Hamas attackers reveal a coordinated plan to target children and take hostages inside an Israeli village near Gaza. This is NBC. This is not Fox News or Breitbart here. Documents exclusively obtained by NBC News show that Hamas created detailed plans to target elementary schools and a youth center in the Israeli kibbutz of Kfar Saad to kill as many people as possible, seize hostages, and quickly move them into the Gaza Strip. Targeting an elementary school and youth center and killing as many people as possible. Labeled top secret in Arabic. Orders for 2 highly trained Hamas units to surround and infiltrate. Do you really need to infiltrate a civilian town? Target places where civilians, including children, gather. Israeli authorities are still determining the death toll in Kfar Saad. Documents found on the bodies of Hamas terrorists by Israeli first responders and shared with NBC News. They include detailed maps and show that Hamas intended to kill or take hostages of civilians and school children. Map of the kibbutz. One page labelled Top Secret outlines a plan of attack for Kfar Saad, saying Combat Unit 1, that's a bit rich, contains the new Dart School, while Combat Unit 2 is to collect hostages. So contrast that with this gentleman's claim that they were given explicit instructions not to target civilians.
Not to harm civilians, and if it has to be done, they have to deal with them in a very highest moral way. But I have to remember that all these military compounds around the Gaza Strip are the same compounds where military people, or soldiers and officers and civilians are living, who are suffocating the Gaza Strip.
I'll just stop you there because
Going full pace with the interruptions as well. So she's not letting him just rattle off his talking points without a bit of pushback. I'd say so far so good from the ABC.
we need to come back and establish some basic shared facts. It was clearly part of the plan of those fighters who crossed the border to murder, terrorise and kidnap. They were not operating on their own volition. So let me ask you again, how did it help the Palestinian cause and the Palestinian people to
She's handling this pretty well, I think.
carry out those savage and horrific acts?
The Palestinian cause again started 75 years ago, and we have always called for freedom, dignity, and independent state.
Yeah, but the rest of the world is not going to return dignity when you target civilians like that. It's never going to happen. Maybe a few states in the Arab world will back your cause, but you're never going to become a legitimate state, self-governing, self-determining, if that's how you gain your freedom. If you nuke Israel and murder all the Jews, I'm pretty sure you're not going to be able to integrate with the rest of the world too well. It was basically genocidal, the attack on October 7, intending to kill as many Jews or Israelis, I don't know which one of those claims is accurate. That's not how you start a nation state. And I'm not saying the Israeli method is better, because especially now they seem resigned to the fact that Palestinians will never have their own state. Particularly if you listen to some of the more recent episodes of Ben Shapiro's show.
A sovereign state. We have offered a peace, a hand of peace 30 years ago by signing the Oslo Agreement to achieve the minimum of our genuine rights of an independent Palestinian state. I mean, they have crushed us, squeezed us in the corner, and given us only one of two choices: either to be killed by a rocket or to killed by poverty and unemployment. Therefore, we have decided to die in dignity, and it was a pure act of defense. We are occupied people. We are defending our existence, our genuine rights.
How is it an act of defense to murder babies?
Oof.
No, first of all, I hope that we don't continue to adopt the Israeli narratives to talk about killing babies.
Well,
but
I'm just going.
They are pretty good at developing narratives that filter through the Western world. The Hamas PR people.
I'm sorry, Doctor Naeem. Let's just agree on a few basic facts, because the only way that you and I can have any kind of conversation is if we agree on a few basic facts. You're an educated man. You were trained in Germany. You're a doctor. I assume you know how to distinguish between facts and propaganda.
Yes.
Do you truly believe what you're saying when you say that the killing of infants in Israel that has been documented by journalists from the BBC to Al Jazeera, by the United Nations, by Amnesty International, do you truly believe what you're saying?
Always keen for a liberal hot take, mate, especially down here in Australia. So lay it on me and I'll get to it in a bit. But I think Sarah Ferguson's doing a pretty good job of interviewing this guy. So all the Liberal senators having a go at the ABC, not really very supportive of the idea or the principle of free speech, is it? Because she's pushing back hard.
When you say those acts did not take place?
It is very smart to reach this point. Therefore, I hope you give me enough time to explain our point of view.
AKA rattle off talking points?
I understand what's said the whole week in the media and at the international level, but I have also the right to defend my position. First of all, we are occupied people. We have the right, based on international law, to react, to resist our occupiers, which is in this case the Israelis.
Perfectly well as an educated man. You know perfectly well as an educated man that international law does not allow you to murder civilians, to murder babies, to take elderly people and young people hostage.
Yes, I know that, and we are committed to the international
Impossible?
Humanitarian law.
Citation needed.
But again, I have to remember you that all these basic military compounds around Gaza Strip, where most of them are soldiers and officers who are killing our children.
I mean, just before I go on with this, if the inverse is possible, then I'm going to need a source for that being impossible. So feel free to lay it on me.
And women and elderly every day. And within 1 week, we are talking about 3,000 Palestinians. 60% of them are women. And
another pretty classic MO from Hamas's PR machine is to just cite death figures. Raw death figures don't really talk about the intention behind those deaths. If Hamas's rockets are sitting in the cemetery behind a hospital, that's not the same as 1,000 operatives breaking into Israel and torching a bunch of villages. So this is stuff we've all heard before from a number of other Hamas-aligned sources. Or Hassan Piker. So he's not really giving us any new information here, and I think old Sarah Ferguson's doing a pretty damn good job with this guy.
Children killed by Israeli killings machine. That we are occupied, we are defending our position, our country. Therefore, it is an act of defense. Okay, in the middle of the confrontation, there was some civilians. The clear instruction was not to kill civilians, but I can give you an
clear instruction not to kill civilians. Top secret maneuver describes plan for Hamas unit to secure the east side of Kfar Saad while second unit controls the west. It says kill as many as possible and capture hostages. So he's just lying. This Hamas PR gentleman is just lying. Unless you also then claim that all this independently verified stuff by the NBC, by the BBC, I think some of it's been on CNN as well, unless it's all fake, which would be a flat earth argument about NASA photos and footage of the ISS. So, just putting that out there. From the best information we have available, this dude's just lying.
I send you a lot of videos, including Israeli media outlets who are talking about Israelis, civilians killed by Israelis. And the last one was 2 days ago when the Israelis thought that this is a Palestinian man and he has been killed in one of these kibbutzes around Gaza Strip. Therefore, okay, I agree there was civilians who was killed, but you cannot talk about civilians who are inside, because these military compounds were inside the kibbutz or settlements.
Well, that's not the case, and there are, as I said before, there are a very large number of international journalists and organisations who have been to the kibbutz where those massacres took place, who testify to the murders and to the burning of individuals after those attacks. But let's move on. I want to talk about the hostages, because we're in it's difficult to understand what Hamas is doing with the hostages right now. So one day it's threatening to kill them. The next day, it releases videos purporting to show that they are caring for them, bearing in mind that some of these hostages, women and children, were the survivors of massacres. Let's get one thing understood between us, do you accept that taking civilian hostages is a war crime?
Again, this has been clarified.
So I can see how you'd say that, coming at it from a critical theory perspective. I don't personally buy it though. I think fetishes don't require power at all. In fact, I think the idea of a fetish is completely disconnected from the idea of systemic power. So, interesting thought though. Wasn't on my top 5 list of conversations I thought I'd be having today. So,
Yesterday by the spokesman of Al-Qassam Brigade, we haven't planned at any moment to take any civilian hostages as any civilians as hostages. The plan was to take or to fight against soldiers and to take some soldiers as hostages, because we have more than 5,800 prisoners now for decades in the Israeli jails.
So,
But accidentally, they are found in the. Sorry, let me continue. They found in the field, and yesterday they have announced it clearly. At the moment, we have the security facility. I mean, the aggression is stopped. We are ready to release them all, including the foreigners.
it's interesting. I'd like to hear his perspective on the 200 plus people that were mowed down at the music festival. Maybe they weren't civilians either, but more likely they were civilians. They were more likely to be left-wing Israeli civilians, and they would have been the civilians most likely to support his cause. So, again, he's got the talking points down pat. He's got his single overriding communication objective, but I think he's full of shit.
So you're going to release all the hostages, but in the meantime, you're now making an argument, for the first time as I understand it, that Hamas lost control of its fighters, that they were not operating under the orders.
Doing a great job here. I don't know what these Liberal senators are on about, frankly.
Of the.
If you're ever going to interview a Hamas PR guy, this is about as good as it gets. This is how it would be done.
Hamas leadership. Is that what you're saying?
No, I didn't say that. What I say, yes, it is. Look, at the moment, the whole siege.
Oh, and she's dislodged him from his SOCO, so she must be doing something right.
Fall down. There are other Palestinian groups who became part of the operation. Even simple, ordinary people, when the prison around Gaza Strip was broken and the siege was open, a lot of even normal, ordinary people came into the other side.
That's true. There were quite a few videos of civilians running through the gaps in the fence and raiding a few of the now empty homes, stealing bikes and things like that.
It doesn't mean that it is that we.
So he's not all full of shit.
We lost control, but again, it was after a few minutes or maybe 1-2 hours, it was a chaos in the area. Again, we have announced it clearly that we are caring for them based on our moral obligations, but at the moment the aggression is stopped. We are ready to release all of them, including all foreigners.
You are now saying it is the position of the Hamas leadership that it was not their intention to slaughter civilians, that the situation got out of control. That was not their intention. Is that your argument?
It is 100% our plan to fight against armed soldiers, not to harm civilians, not to take them as captures. Therefore, we have distributed a lot of videos where even civilians on the way to Gaza, when they have discovered that they are civilians, they send them back or they help them to.
That's a video I haven't seen. Any of the hostages being sent straight back during the attack.
To go back to the other side. Therefore, this was not a plan. Not only, I'm sorry to say it is not a proper word to say slaughter, but we were not planning even to harm them or to attack them at all.
Why do you use the position that you hold to tell civilians in northern Gaza, families and children, not to seek safety in the south, but to stay behind in Gaza, in northern Gaza?
Sarah, I'm sorry. Do you believe such? Sorry, it is not you, but do you believe such idiot argument or idiot propaganda? Look, it is impossible. It is impossible to move from north to south, or from south to north.
Hundreds of thousands of Gazans. Sorry, hundreds of thousands.
Yes.
Hundreds of thousands of Gazans have heard the warning and have left the north to the south. However, Hamas and you personally issued instructions to the people of Gaza to remain in northern Gaza.
Ooh. Got you.
Where they will be in great danger.
Sarah, let me clarify this in few words. We are calling all our people to stay at home because it is very dangerous and very serious.
Yeah, that's his best response there.
One of these convoys moving from the north to the south was attacked by the Israelis 3 days ago, and they have killed in one shot 70 Palestinians, including our friends, some doctors, and wounded 200. In the last 3 days, there was 4 massacres in Rafah, in Khan Yunis, in the middle zone, which is in the south. Third, there is no area to be received as refugees, no possibility to accommodate these people, because UNRWA, ICRT, and all international organizations have said we cannot receive anyone because we don't have the facility and we cannot secure anyone.
I believe that is actually true too. Nobody wants anything to do with Palestinian refugees. War seems to follow them around, and that's not their fault, but it is true.
To ask you a final question.
Egypt doesn't want anything, won't even let them settle in the Sinai temporarily. When they tried to assassinate the monarch of Jordan, I think it was, they got sent to the south of Lebanon, and then, boom, civil war. Got kicked out of Lebanon. They just, nobody wants to take them in. Nobody wants to help them. Not even the Arab world.
Israel's response to your savage attack in Israel was predictable. Why do you want more civilians, more people in Gaza to die?
Ooh.
Israel didn't respond to our act of defense. This is the Israeli policy. I can tell you that 1 week before, 8 children killed near the borders. We have a continuous massacre, 250 Palestinians killed during the last few months in the West Bank on Israeli checkpoints. Massacres in 2008, 2012, 2014, 2021, during Great March of Return, thousands and thousands of people are killed during Israel. This is again, they have given us one of two choices, either to leave or to be killed. And we have chosen to die in dignity or to live in dignity.
Sounds to me like they've made their choice. And it's not peace. And it means a lot of people are going to die. It's going to harden the Israelis. A lot of them are going to die as well. But the Israelis will win, absolutely.
Dr. Bassem Naim, that's all we've got time for. Thank you.
Please, thank you very much.
Okay. I think Sarah Ferguson did a decent job there. There's only so hard you can push against people like this with their more extreme views before they just cut the interview entirely, and then nobody gains anything from the whole ordeal. I mean, you could say the same for people like Destiny debating Nick Fuentes. I know that caused a whole heap of shit in his community. You can never perfectly identify the flow of support, the public support that goes from one side to another in exchanges like this. But as far as I'm concerned, it's always better to at least have this information out there and let people judge for themselves. We all saw videos that Hamas agents themselves plastered all over social media, pumping bullets into dead bodies, setting houses on fire, gunning down people in cars at the gates to some of the communities in Israel. So the only way you could possibly claim that they're not targeting civilians is if you don't believe anyone in Israel is a civilian. because they're, quote unquote, living on stolen land, or they're settlers, even though I don't think the people living in Israel proper, as far as international law is concerned, count as settlers. So regardless of what you think about how Israel was formed, the people displaced in the Nakba and all that, I don't think any rational-minded person is going to support activity like Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, like the October 7 operation to combat oppression. Like, eye for an eye, everyone gets fucked. Because how you do is absolutely as important as what you do. And by that measure alone, these Hamas fighters were just terrorists, massacring civilians, like a school shooter, or like the guy in LA, in Las Vegas, who gunned down a bunch of people at a music festival. And I think the more people observe these sorts of claims from the very top, this is Hamas's international PR guy, the less the international community is likely to drag Israel back from their own operations. And either way, the end result is thousands and thousands and thousands of dead Palestinians, a few dead Israelis, and no Palestinian state. Not even no Palestinian state, no Palestinian normal existence, regardless of statehood. So, now that... Anyway, Sarah Ferguson, good job, I think. I think the Liberal senators are having a bit of a whinge, just using it as another excuse to berate the ABC. But occasionally, our national state-owned broadcaster does some good work, and I think this is one of those occasions. So now that we've dealt with the brutality happening in the Middle East, check on the cricket. Smithy still in? Come on. For fuck's sake.
This has been another presentation from Nine's Wide World of
Oh,
Sports.
so Aussies are hanging in there. Hanging in there. Anyway, we'll come back to the cricket a little bit later. Oh, so now, let's have a bit of old school Sydney-Melbourne rivalry. I caught the YouTuber Building Beautifully on a TV interview recently. He has some pretty interesting things to say about the quality of our public transport systems. Funnily enough, we all seem to hate the system we have, but when the tourists come and check it out, turns out, hey, both Sydney and Melbourne have a pretty good rail network for a country as sparsely populated
Sydney
as
and
ours.
Melbourne is a rivalry as old as time itself.
Amen.
Oh, hey there, how are you? Oh, hello, I'm not too bad. I just arrived from Sydney, actually.
Ew, you're from Sydney? Go away, go away. Melbourne is better than Sydney, okay? We actually have culture. We have laneways, for crying out loud. Oh, and our road done some weird spaghetti mess like some toddler drew them, alright?
Well, at least he's self-aware.
Oh, and by the way, we have trams. You don't have trams.
Trams are just electric buses that can't pull over to the side of the road, really, though.
You don't have trams. Oh, and also, do you want takeaway late at night? Good luck with that. Everything's closed. What are you gonna do now, huh?
I'm sorry?
You ruined my day. You have made a sworn enemy for life. Buy my kidneys. Oh, won't anyone buy my kidneys?
Oh, hey there, how are you?
Oh, sir, thank you so much. Please buy my kidneys, please.
I'm sorry, I actually only just arrived here from Melbourne. Oh, you're from Melbourne? Don't worry about it. If you're from Melbourne, you definitely can't afford to help me. How do you figure? Come on, no one would live in Melbourne unless they couldn't afford to live in Sydney. We're pretty much a better city in every way, shape and form. Our house prices are literally so expensive that you need to sell your organs in order to live here.
What a wonderful place to be.
Is that really the flex you think it is? Just go away now. If I finally manage to sell both my kidneys today, I'll finally be able to afford that deposit on that $5 million, 2 square metre, half a bedroom unit 2 hours from Sydney CBD and Marsden Park.
Well, there's one aspect of the Sydney versus Melbourne debate that perhaps should be discussed a little more. Which city has better public transport? Today, I've teamed up with YouTuber Philip Malice from Melbourne. He has a great city planning channel based in Melbourne. In this video, I'll be talking...
Because Melbourne actually makes use of city planning, whereas Sydney is just this guy's 6-year-old kid scribbling on the napkin at a restaurant.
About what Sydney's public transport does better than Melbourne's.
Hello! After you're done with Shareth's video, make sure you come over to my channel where I'll be talking about what makes Melbourne's public transport better than Sydney's.
I'm Shareth.
And I'm Philip.
And welcome to Building Beautifully.
It's nice to get away from the drama and just appreciate some architectural and, town planning stuff from once in a while.
Before I continue, massive shout out to my monthly Ko-fi supporters. Please subscribe if you haven't already. And do be sure to check out the rest of my channel, your go-to YouTube destination for all things city planning, after the video.
Now, I know what you're thinking. Melbourne's public transport must be better because we have trams. And that's sort of true.
Not really. Trams suck. They're real annoying, especially as a driver. And they're super slow. But they're alright when they have dedicated lanes.
If you want to find out more, come on over to my channel.
But see, the idea that Melbourne's public transport is better just because of its trams is a bit of a misconception. They're great, don't get me wrong.
Because it took Sydney 7 frickin' years to build one tram line towards the southeast.
But they
So now Sydney has trams as well.
Don't necessarily make Melbourne superior outright. The first and perhaps most crucial aspect that Sydney does better than Melbourne is the frequency of its rail services. A turn-up
Sydney has trains running all night, does it?
and go rail service is one where a commuter can comfortably show up to a train station at any time and just know that their next rail service is only a few minutes away at most. In Sydney, pretty much every station gets a train in both directions every 15 minutes, no matter what time of the day or day of the week.
Fair enough. Didn't know that.
These aren't quite turn up and go frequencies, but they're honestly not too far off. There are some stations that get lower frequencies, but even those stations will...
Look at that map. Look at that freaking map. I don't know how anyone can claim there's even a contest here. What is this? Which way is to the outer suburbs? Oh, god damn it.
Will never dip below every 30
Painful.
minutes, even on the weekend or on public holidays.
Frequency is sadly where Melbourne loses to Sydney. At the average Melbourne suburban station out in the suburbs, you're getting trains about every 10 to 15 minutes in peak. But this can drop substantially in off-peak and during evenings to every 30 minutes or even longer. Most lines operate with 20-minute headways outside of peak times on weekdays, but this can vary a lot. While some stations closer to the city have great service of every 10 minutes or better, once you start heading out into the suburbs, you're looking at...
Isn't that a nice, normal rail transit map? Look at that. We've got the city here. And then we've got the radial spurs to the outer suburbs. Makes perfect sense as your city expands. Mwah. People who play SimCity understand what I'm talking about here. This makes sense. I look at this and think, yep, that's a train network.
frequencies of up to every 40 minutes, particularly down some of the branch lines like Cranbourne or Pakenham. It's also very inconsistent. Coming up with an average small station for Melbourne is pretty difficult for these reasons. But let's look at Coolaroo. This station on the Craigieburn line gets a service to Flinders Street every 20 minutes on weekdays off-peak, but this drops to every 30 minutes after 8 PM on weekdays. Not great.
Now, let's take a look at how often services run in the peak at Sydney's major stations, such as this station, Hornsby Station. Pretty great frequencies, rarely less than every 4 minutes to Central. And again,
is there ever more than 4 people on any of those trains?
Services remain great off-peak too. On a Sunday night, you can get a train from Central all the way out to Penrith every 15 minutes. From Chatswood, my favourite station in Sydney, most nights there are services to Central almost every 5 minutes, all the way until midnight. Frequency is freedom. You need frequent services in order for people to feel comfortable with relying on them instead of driving. No
you don't. You just need to make it too expensive to drive.
one wants to wait 30 minutes for the next train.
Sadly, in Melbourne, that's exactly what you have to do. Box Hill, a suburb in our eastern suburbs, is the closest equivalent that Melbourne has to Chatswood in Sydney. On a Saturday night, Box Hill gets trains every 10 minutes up to around 7 PM, then every 20 until 8 PM, and after that only every 30. This really pales in comparison to Chatswood. This is despite them both being on 2 railway lines and being a similar distance from the CBD. Melbourne's rail network is really built around commuters travelling during peak times. Outside of this, it seems you're generally expected to take another mode of transport or just stay at home.
Sydney's network recognises that people want to make journeys all the time, even off-peak, for all sorts of reasons. Sydney's network comes much closer to being a turn-up-and-go rail service than Melbourne, although every 15 minutes at most stations is a bit far from that still. But wait.
Jesus.
Sydney does have a turn-up-and-go rail service in the form of its rapid transit system, Sydney Metro.
It's a nice little CGI graphic there.
Sydney Metro's frequencies are even better than Sydney trains, with a metro arriving every 4 minutes on peak and every 10 minutes off-peak. Sydney Metro will have 113 kilometres of track by roughly the year 2032.
Yes, if everything goes according to plan. I think these are the new driverless trains as well. But what a pain in the ass having 2 separate and incompatible rail networks. That's almost like going with one broad gauge and one narrow gauge.
2. Don't cancel the Sydney Metro West, Chrisman.
Oh my god, disconnect. Like, what is that? We're just going to chuck a little spur over here.
Meaning Sydney's high-frequency services are only going to become even more widespread.
Meanwhile, Melbourne doesn't really have rapid transit. We have the Metro Tunnel opening in 2025, which is meant to result in turn-up-and-go frequencies across the network. But we haven't...
And that is absolutely not going to happen. It'll be great for a couple of people in the inner city, with less congestion, but it's not going to help people in Cranbourne get to work.
Received many details from the state government on how exactly the timetables are going to change to achieve
because they're good at keeping it airy-fairy.
This. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
Next, let's take a look at Sydney's City Circle and Melbourne's City Loop. Sydney's City Circle is pretty straightforward. All the lines go to Town Hall, all but the T4 go to Wynyard, and only the T2, T3 and T8 go to the rest.
The T2 generally goes anti-clockwise via the City Circle inner track, while the T8 generally goes clockwise via the City Circle outer track. The T3 alternates between these 2 tracks.
The biggest problem here, therefore, is that 3 lines must share 2 tracks, which limits capacity. However, this is being resolved with the Sydney Metro City and South West, which will redirect the T3 and free up capacity on the City Circle. Brilliant.
However, Melbourne's City Loop is so much more complicated
I wonder if it'll be as good as the Sydney monorail.
than Sydney City Circle that you might need a degree to understand it. While we do have 4 tracks, these are shared between around 10 different lines, depending on the time of day and day of the week. Different trains also enter and exit the City Loop at different places. And to make matters worse, some lines even change direction in the middle of the day just to confuse you even more. This also leaves gaps between trains of up to 30 minutes in the middle of weekdays, so that trains can have time to reverse. That basically means that if you want to get home from, say, Melbourne Central to Box Hill at 12:45 PM on a weekday, bad luck, you'll have to wait half an hour for your train. Sorry. Another point to Sydney.
Sydney
No, don't give them away that easily.
also wins when it comes to wayfinding. All of Sydney's
You have got to be kidding me. Maps. Sydney. You're going to tell me it's easier to find your way around this. Citation needed, sir.
modes of transport have distinct roundels that make it really clear where your transit stop is. The orange T is for trains, the cyan M is for metro, the blue B is for buses, the red L is for light rail, and the green F is for ferries. The modes of transport themselves are mostly coloured after the colours of the roundels, which is a brilliant touch, especially for tourists new to the city. Furthermore, major transport interchanges all use the same font and style of sign, which just makes everything very uniform, giving commuters confidence that they can trust the signage that they are following.
Nice try. I don't know if the font on the sign makes your transport system easier to use. I think I'm still going to award that point to Melbourne, mate.
Compare this with Melbourne. When PTV was first established,
don't go into the mess that is PTV.
there was a good effort to standardise and update a lot of our public transport signage. This included making consistent colours to identify different modes. We have blue for metropolitan trains, green for trams, orange for metropolitan and town buses, purple for V-Line trains and coaches, plus a bonus turquoise colour for ferries. While this has now been done
two of them
pretty consistently across all vehicles, there are still a lot of problems with our wayfinding in general. This includes confusing or incorrect signs, and several different design suites all coexisting at the same time. Ultimately, I think it's just much easier to follow the distinct, brightly coloured signs and roundels of Sydney than the adequately designed but less distinct signs of Melbourne.
But hey, Melbourne has trams at least. Yes, I have to hand that to Melbourne. It's not even a competition.
It's not even a good thing to win on though, is it?
Although, we do have ferries. Obviously, they don't compare at all to Melbourne's trams, and they're sort of treated more as a tourist attraction than a public transport service.
Who gets to work on an old boat?
But they are something.
But again, when it comes to buses, Sydney wins. Sydney's major bus routes mostly run up to every 5 minutes on peak, and every 15 minutes off peak.
It's pretty good.
Minor routes generally don't dip
I don't know about getting to that bus stop though.
Below every 30 minutes. Admittedly, the bus network is much weaker in the suburbs, where you can find routes that only run once an hour or only during peak hour. However, bus priority infrastructure is also much stronger in Sydney.
Bus priority infrastructure is like dedicated tram lanes. Really? It's just another road off to the side of the road.
And indeed,
if a bus can't travel on a normal road, then there's no point.
Newer intersections are generally required to incorporate bus lanes.
But it's worse in Melbourne, sadly. Buses that run every 15 minutes or better are not very common. On weekends and interpeak, with some exceptions, most buses only run every 30 minutes or longer. While we do have some corridors that have turn up and go timetables of every 10 minutes or better, like Johnson Street and Hoddle Street, these are definitely the exception rather than the rule. Granted, our trams do pick up some of the slack, but our buses still need a lot of work.
Let's move on to railway electrification. Railway electrification involves powering trains with electricity as opposed to diesel engines like a truck. Electric railways are more energy efficient.
Pretty sure diesel electric trains use a diesel generator to provide the electricity, so I think they're still technically electric trains.
Have lower emissions and operating costs, and electric...
Not when all your power is coming from coal.
Locomotives are quieter, more powerful and more reliable. Basically, electrification is king. Well, all the lines in metropolitan Sydney are electrified, and the lines to Lithgow, Wollongong...
These are the only non-electrified railways on the Sydney Intercity network. They're all outside Sydney. A very similar thing exists in Melbourne, except I think the freight train lines are not electrified.
And Newcastle are electrified too.
On the other hand, Melbourne has a couple of lines within its urban boundary.
Oh, he's going to talk about the Stony Point line going through Baxter, my neck of the woods.
That are not electrified, specifically the regional rail link that's serviced by V-Line and the Stony Point line. And there is no electrified railway anywhere outside Melbourne. This leads...
There used to be, and then they ripped it up because it didn't get used enough.
...to reduced train speeds and increased local air pollution in booming suburbs like Tarneit. Another point to Sydney.
Sydney's express services are also much better. In the peak hour, and sometimes even off-peak, you can get an express train from pretty much every major station in Sydney to Central. For example, services from Campbelltown to Central don't stop at every station on the TA, but instead skip a lot of the smaller stations, saving a commuter almost 15 minutes.
This isn't the case in Melbourne though, where most lines don't run express services at all, and those that do tend to have very confusing stopping patterns. The worst offender for this is the Belgrave-Lilydale line, which has 13 different stopping patterns on any given weekday, so good luck trying to work that out. We also have a lot of lines with only 2 tracks, which we still try to run express trains on.
And it does not work very well. Frankston line.
There are ones like the Hurstbridge line, which has 2 tracks and operates a small number of limited express trains from Ivanhoe and Clifton Hill. This means that there are several gaps of up to 15 minutes at intermediate stations during the morning peak. This is because without the extra tracks to overtake, like Sydney, other trains have to wait for the express trains to run through.
Now, last but not least, I've always said that public transport access should not be reserved for a special select few, but rather maximised to as many people as possible. And, well, Sydney just does TOD a lot better than Melbourne. This map shows how many dwellings Melbourne has built within 1 kilometre of a station since 2006. And this map shows how many dwellings Sydney has built.
Interesting. I guess it's because Sydney has a lot more medium density housing than Melbourne. Melbourne's very concentrated.
Sydney has well and truly recognised the need not only to decentralise outside of the CBD, but to house people in well-connected areas with great public transport.
Consequently, we've ended up with some excellent TOD, such as St Leonard's, Walleye Creek, and my personal favourite, Chatswood. For that matter,
Got all this medium density stuff. Where's the McMansions? Where's the suburban grid?
unlike Melbourne, Sydney also has a lot more railway interchanges outside of Central, which helps to create mini-centrals that help to promote TOD. On the other hand, Melbourne hasn't made as much of an effort to build near public transport, and that's a bit of a shame.
That's the Eastern Freeway, and that big median in the middle is for, you guessed it, a train line that never got built and is probably never going to get built. We can probably chuck a few more lanes in there though.
This is further personified when comparing where both cities have built their shopping centres. Credit to Daniel Bowen for this excellent table. Only 3 of Melbourne's 10 biggest shopping centres are located next to a train station.
Chadstone being the biggest shopping centre.
As opposed to 9 of Sydney's. Melbourne simply does not seem to capitalise on its public transport the way that Sydney does.
When we first started talking about making this video, Philip and I came to a unanimous agreement over one thing. Sydney's public transport is better than Melbourne.
God damn it.
For all the reasons I've listed in this video. And Twitter largely agreed with us.
Well, that's Twitter though. He also hosted a poll on his YouTube channel recently on not which city had the better public transport, but which city was just better, and the results were basically the same as this. 75% of respondents claimed Sydney was the winner. I couldn't help but deliver a couple of smart-ass remarks on behalf of Melburnians everywhere. We have a fantastic and almost complete orbital and radial artery network. Look at these. Look at this nice big, come on, there we go. Look at this nice circle around the edge freeway. We're almost done with this little link here in the northeast. We've got a nice, look at this lovely suburban grid we've got going on. So easy to navigate. North and south. Do you need anything more? And on top of it all, Global livability rankings. The international community sides with Melbourne every single time. 2023, Melbourne pips Sydney. 2022, Sydney not even on the list. 2021, oh, Sydney not on the list again. 2019, oh, so close Melbourne. Not so close Sydney. 2018, oh, so close again Melbourne. Oh, Sydney dropping down. 2017, there we are at the top. 2016, oh, look at that, at the top again. Again and again and again, Melbourne wins, more livable city. And that's about all I've got. That's what I rely on to say Melbourne wins. Oh, and we can U-turn at traffic lights, which you can't do in Sydney, and that's a pain in the ass. So, boosh, Melbourne wins. Now that we've got that important discussion out of the way, I was going to have a chat about the horrible shed fire that killed 3 kids just north of Geelong in Melbourne's southwest a few days ago. Mainly the gross comments that appeared all over Channel 7's Facebook page of this news story. People using the state of the house, the fact that there's knee-high grass in the backyard, basically suggesting negligence by the parents, and a few suggesting that they intentionally killed their own kids, because apparently no kids under the age of 6 years old are allowed to just play together in their own backyard. But I went back and checked the Facebook post a couple hours ago, and most of the Facebook accounts associated with these comments had been locked or privated, obviously after suffering a sizable backlash. I think a lot of people actually just forget that they're not anonymous on Facebook sometimes. They just see someone living in an old commission home area, 4 kids, and they make a logical leap to, these people should have had DHS take their kids from them. They're clearly negligent. They don't deserve kids. They should have been watched at all times. But the only information we have at the moment, as of this moment anyway, is that a fire happened in the shed in the backyard with the kids inside. Like, it could have been candles, old lighter, or even a box of matches lying around. Could have been an exposed light bulb. Hell, I've started a couple of fires in my bed with a light bulb. And that the mum suffered some pretty horrendous burns herself trying to drag her 18-month and up kids out of an inferno in her backyard. So look, rather than me telling you the story, we should just watch the original news article from a few days ago, and then probably an update.
2
from last
children
night.
have died and another 2 are fighting for life in hospital after a tragic shed fire in a Corio backyard.
The 4 siblings, one as young as 18 months old, were playing when the shed burst into flames, sparking a major emergency response.
A scene of pure misery, with this young life, one of 2 in the balance. The badly injured boy had been one of 4 siblings in a...
So, people on social media were basically just looking at the state of the property and saying, oh, of course the kids were in danger. It's a mess. There's trash on the ground. There's knee-high grass. These people clearly are not responsible enough to have kids.
Backyard shed at a house at Corio. Around 10:30, a fire erupted inside the shed.
It is unfortunately the worst case scenario of what we can expect with an incident like this.
The immediate impact of the fire was shocking and severe. All 4 of the children were found unconscious. Attempts were made to resuscitate 2 of the younger children, but they could not be saved. One of the deceased was 18 months old.
It was a horrific scene. As you can imagine, with children involved, it's difficult for officers and all of our emergency services to be able to respond, but training kicks in.
The two other children, a 6-year-old girl and her 3-year-old brother, suffered severe burns. They were...
I believe the 3-year-old brother died today, so the 6-year-old girl's the only one left. She's the only one that survived.
Airlifted to the Royal Children's Hospital.
I think she's in a medical coma too now, I believe.
At least one adult had been at the property at the time of the fire, the mother of the 4 children.
How's the mother who is at the property? What sort of condition is she in at the moment?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that.
The distraught mother and several neighbours reported the fire to 000. Several nearby residents came to the aid of the family. Locals say it's a tight-knit area.
Pretty shocked. You know, you sort of don't think it's going to happen down the road for you, but yeah, no, sorry, mate.
The scale of the tragedy demanded a large turnout by emergency services. 2 of the state's fleet of 5 air ambulances, dozens of police, paramedics and firefighters. Several of the emergency services workers and volunteers who responded to the tragedy were stood down afterwards due to the extreme trauma. But that shock is just a shadow of the overwhelming grief being felt by the family of the 4 children.
And Cameron Bowe is in.
Obviously just a crazy tragedy, but what I fail to understand is how people can just look at a messy home and make such a leap to judgment. So I don't think any parent, whether they're from Toorak or bloody Kui Rup, can seriously say they've never taken an eye off their kids playing together in their own backyard. So maybe just pump the brakes on publicly and not anonymously abusing members of a family who've just lost 3 of their 4 kids for negligence, or calling them murderers, or before you have all the information. It's the whole breaking news game. If you're going to play it, you have to be damn sure that you have 100% of the relevant information, and that's never going to happen. Like, we still don't even know. We still don't have all the information about the Hamas invasion in southern Israel. The last death tally I heard was something like 1,400 plus. Ben Shapiro today claimed 1,500. The Israeli government is still assessing the situation, and that's nearly 2 weeks later. So just pump the brakes on the judgment. You don't need to be a fucking asshole online. It's not necessary. I know it's probably cathartic occasionally. Lord knows I've made a few rushed mistakes in the old Facebook post after a couple of beers, but think about what's going on the other side of that. Whoa, what a story. But before I clock off for the evening, let's check back on the cricket one more time before the copyright gods. Smithy, at least he's made double figures for the first time this tournament. It's good to finally see him putting some runs on the board. So we'll leave it there for tonight. Time to crack open a coldie and watch the rest of the cricket, I reckon. So, cheers everyone. And remember, pump the brakes before you be a fucking asshole to someone online. Always a good idea. Cheery pip.